Hello, class 6 students. How are you all? I hope all my students are absolutely fine. Okay, so what is Prerna ma'am going to teach you today from your textbook? Which chapter are we going to read? Chapter number 5. All right. And this is on page number 45. Okay. So I want all of you to first open your textbooks to page number 45. Sorry, this is page number 43, not 45. So chapter number 5 on page number 43. What is the name of the chapter? Impact of British policies. Now, what are the main topics that we are going to cover in this chapter? There are 4 main topics that we are going to cover in this chapter. The first is economic policy. Second is exploitation of artisans and weavers. Third, drain of wealth. And fourth, introduction to modern education. Now, I'm sure all of you remember that in your previous chapters that we've studied, we talked about the various policies that the British introduced only to have a firm control over various regions in India. Correct? And more or less the policies that they introduced were related to the political aspect, that how they wanted to have a representative in the in all the Indian kingdoms, and how they even try to enter the army by stationing their troops. Fine. Now, the British knew that in order to have total control over India, it wasn't just the political aspect that they had to enter into or they needed to control. They had to control other aspects as well. So they thought of the economic aspect, that how they can make most of the wealth from India. What are the policies that they can introduce so that they can extract maximum wealth from India? Other than this, the British also thought that if we start changing the education system of India, what are we going to do? By changing the education system, we will teach people, or we'll teach the students, that we British, the influence of British is positive and not negative. This way, we are going to train the minds of the people, and people will start, acting in our favor, which is going to, of course, smoothen our rule over the country. So once they thought about this economic aspect, they again introduced a few policies. Like in the previous chapter, we read about the few policies that Lord Dalhousie had introduced so that a firm control over regions of India could be established. Now we're going to study about certain economic policies that were introduced by different British officers, British generals, so that they can have a more strengthened control over India. So let us start reading about these policies. Now, with the establishment of the East India Company rule, especially after receiving the Diwani of Bengal in 1765, the company, that is the East India Company, they began to collect maximum amount of land revenue, just leaving a bare minimum as wages and expenses of the cultivator. So basically, what was the first source of income, if you can put it like that? So the first source of income that was there for the British was to collect tax over land, the land which was cultivated by Indians only. But the British were collecting tax from these people. Governor Warren Hastings, he experimented on a 5-year settlement with the highest bidder of revenue. Later, he restored the annual collection of land revenue, but the principle of maximum amount remained. So basically, Warren Hastings was someone who talked about collecting land tax, and he figured out a way in which the British would get a huge amount of tax from the land, right? So first, we're going to talk about the Permanent Settlement Act, or the Permanent Settlement System. So who introduced this? This was introduced by Lord Cornwallis, who was the Governor General of India from 1785 to 1793. When? In 1793, where? In Bengal. So Bengal was the first region. So we have studied in previous chapters that Bengal was a very fertile region. It was a very prosperous region. And it was, in fact, one of the first regions that the British wanted to conquer because of the fertile land it had. So in this region of Bengal, which was completely under the British rule now because of the Diwani rights, so this system was introduced in Bengal. What and how? Under this act, the Rajas and the Talukdars, they recognized as, they were given the title as Zamindars. They were asked to collect the rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. Amount was that was to be paid was fixed permanently, but this much amount of tax you need to pay to the British. Unfortunately, in case of any drought or any natural disaster, even when the income was very less, still the farmers had to pay the tax. And why? Investment in land had to be encouraged and agriculture had to be improved for more revenue. So this was the objective of the British. Now, what were the further terms and conditions of the permanent settlement system? Let's find that out. Okay. So I told you that Lord Cornwallis was the one who introduced this system. So what were the terms and conditions? So the landlords, who were the zamindars basically, they became hereditary owners of land for which they had been paying revenue. So someone else is working on the farm, and the one who's collecting the revenue, the land is completely under his control, and he becomes the hereditary owner. So, and these zamindars, they could buy, sell, give, or mortgage their zamindaris, that is their estates. In case of failure to pay the land revenue, let's say there's a natural disaster or the harvest has not been so good, what happened? And there was a fixed date. Their estates would be confiscated and auctioned. So this was the biggest disadvantage. The rate of revenue charged in 1789 to 19 was 90% of the produce would be made permanent. Now 90% of the tax is a huge amount. The remaining 10% of the produce would be the zamindar's payment in return for the revenue collection. That was kind of a salary for him. So basically, the British had 100% control over the land revenue. And where was it introduced? It was, I told you, introduced in Bengal, and then in Bihar, Orissa, Banaras division of UP, and North Karnataka. Now, when we read these terms and conditions, we see that there are a lot of disadvantages, which we are going to discuss as well. But let's first see if there were some advantages. First, it removed corruption and overtaxation in revenue collection. So basically, now the amount was 90% is what the tax had to be paid. So now, the British could not demand any random amount of tax. 90% was fixed. It was permanent. The company was now sure of its revenue amount. So again, it is advantageous to the British. There would not be frequent transfer of ownership, because if there's frequent transfer of ownership, of course, there's a lot of confusion that who's the owner, who's supposed to pay tax. And the last is the zamindars would try to improve cultivation and introduce irrigation if necessary. So this was the only advantage for the Indians. That because someone knew, these zamindars knew that we have to, pay a huge amount of tax. What we need to do, we need to ensure that the fertility of the soil is of super quality. So they, of course, probably did their best that the fertility of the soil is of good quality. But what were the disadvantages? First, it created an ideal and parasitic class of zamindars who lived on the hard work of the cultivators. Now, these zamindars, they would sit the entire day, exploit the farmers. There were no fixed working hours. There were no fixed working days, no concept of labor laws as well. In fact, the conditions under which the cultivators were made to work were highly inhumane. So the zamindar never really cared about the farmers. All he cared about was revenue collection so that his pockets can be filled with the salary. That was 10% of the tax. The zamindars increased land revenues at their own free will. Now the British had fixed it at 90%, but the zamindars, a few of them, made it even up to 92% or 95%, but gave the company only the fixed amount. So again, the corrupt practice still exists. The zamindars officials, they harassed and tortured the cultivators with false cases and eviction. Correct? Something that I already told. And then the zamindars appointed agents and sub-agents for revenue collection. All the three classes, they squeezed money from the cultivators for their selfish interest. So basically what is happening, it is the cultivator, it is the farmer who's at the receiving end, while the zamindars, his agents, and the British, all of them are living a luxurious life. Someone who's doing the actual hard work is not getting anything, but everyone else is. So these were the disadvantages of the permanent settlement system. Now, after this permanent settlement system, which had its own sets of merits and demerits, the British introduced another system. What was this system or this economic policy? So this policy was called as the Ryotwari system, and it was introduced in 1976. And who were the two people who devised this policy? It was Alexander Reed and Sir Thomas Munro. They devised this Ryotwari system. What exactly were the features? So land revenue collection was settled with the ryots directly, ryots meaning the farmer. So what is the difference between the permanent settlement system and the Ryotwari system? That in permanent settlement system, a zamindar was appointed by the British who was collecting taxes on behalf of British. However, in the Ryotwari system, the British, they said that we don't need a zamindar, let's eliminate this middleman. We are going to directly collect the revenue from the farmer. The ryot, that is the cultivator, he was asked to pay 50% of the produce as government's share. So now you see, of course, the revenue also comes to a decline. Later, the revenue was reduced to 1/3 of the produce. The revenue had to be paid every year regularly, and fine was imposed in case of non-payment of revenue. So these were the features of the Ryotwari system. After this Ryotwari system came the Mahalwari system. It was introduced in 1883, and who introduced it? By William Bentinck. And where was it introduced? In the central province, northwest frontier. Remember, Punjab regions and all, what we studied in the previous chapter. Agra, Punjab, and the Gangetic Valley of the British India. The Mahalwari system had many provisions of both the zamindari system, that was the permanent settlement, and the Ryotwari system. In this system, the land was divided into mahals, and each mahal, it comprised of one or more than one will. Ownership of rights were vested with the peasants, that is with the farmers, which was the similar feature of the Ryotwari system. The village committee was held responsible for collection of taxes. Now, while all these policies were introduced related to agriculture, and of course, majorly to in agriculture, because that was the main occupation in India at that point of time. Now came the exploitation of artisans and weavers under the hands of the British. How did this happen? Let's study it. Okay. So basically, what happened? That in the beginning of the 18th century, India was regarded as a storehouse of cotton and silk, textiles, and other handicrafts. This we all are aware. Now, when the Industrial Revolution came, that is, goods were produced through machines, basically the clothes and certain other material like carpets and mats. These were made. These came as machine made and not handmade, which was a specialty in India. What happened? English merchants forced their governments to impose heavy duties on Indian goods exported to Britain. The machine-made British goods were sent to India without any duty. So such kind of discrimination occurred. Cheap goods flooded the market. So what happened? When such affordable goods were available, even Indians themselves started buying British goods instead of buying goods that were produced or that were made by their native people. What happened? The conditions of the artisans and weavers worsened. Their goods were not exported, and they could not get the best quality raw material as it was taken away by the English merchants to England. The weavers left the manufacturing towns of Dhaka, Murshidabad, and Surat and returned to their villages to take up agriculture. So basically, the handicraft industry came to a decline. And products like silk and woolen cloths, iron glass, pottery, jewelry, ornaments, etc., they were overtaxed. So the artisans faced a very bad situation. So artisans and weavers were basically out of job. This was the exploitation that they faced. Then we talk about the drain of wealth. So drain of wealth, we understand that is you take away the wealth of a country by looting it. So drain of wealth meant taking away of huge sums of money by the company to enrich England. And after the Battle of Plassey, that was in 1757, and especially after the Diwani rights which were granted in 1765, the East India Company, it used its revenue income to invest in its trade and commerce. The vast revenue was also spent under the following heads. What was that? The dividends of the company shareholders, the dues of the British government, the cost of running its administration in London as well as India, and the cost of financing wars in India. So basically what was happening, the money that was collected from India in the form of revenue, it was used by the British for their own survival. And nationalist historians like R.C. Dutt in Economic History of India and Dadabhai Naoroji in Poverty and Un-British Rule have explained the drain of wealth. These are beautiful books. You must read them. Okay. So this was about the economic policies that the British introduced in India, again, to gain control. Now, in the introduction of the chapter, like I told you, that how they even tried to basically change the education system for their own benefit. But were there any merits of this education system? Let's find that out. Okay. So basically, the East India Company brought about major changes in the existing educational setup in India, wherein the first major change was that learning of English language was encouraged. Now, when we talk about the changes in the education system under the British rule, one of the most famous of these changes was the Macaulay's Minute, which was introduced by Lord Thomas Macaulay. He was the member of Governor's Council and is considered as the architect of British education policy in India. And it is said that he wanted to create a class of Indians, a class of people who would appreciate the Western culture, who would be Indians in blood, but British in their mind. So by birth, they might be Indian, but their thought process or their entire, thinking would be just like British or in favor of British. All right. And we talk about the Charter Act. It was of 1813. It is rightly regarded as the foundation stone of English education system in India. And it remained a neglected education, which remained a neglected affair in early days of the East India Company, got a new hope to develop and progress with the insertion of Article 43 in the Charter Act of 1813. And what was decided by this act? A sum of not less than 1 lakh rupee each year shall be set apart and applied to the revision and improvement of literature and the encouragement of learned natives of India. So the British decided that this particular amount will be kept for spending on the basically restructuring of the education system in India. What was the amount? Not more than 1 lakh. Now we talk about Wood's Dispatch. So one of the British generals, he also introduced a number of changes. What were these? So the Wood's Dispatch. And when was it given? On July 19, 1857. And who was in charge for this? Sir Charles Wood. He was the president of the Board of Control and he published this Wood's Dispatch. You can also see the image that is given in your book, which is of Charles Wood. So what were the recommendations? First, a special department of government to promote modern education needs to be set up. Then he talked about setting up of university, and which were on the basis of the model of the London University in each presidency towns, that is Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras. Opening of primary schools for mass education, founding of secondary schools in different parts of India, female education should be promoted. So this again was a good feature of the Wood's Dispatch. And at all school level, 3 languages, English, Hindi, and vernacular, that is, and classical or probably a regional language should be taught. Higher education to be given through English language. So somewhere this acted as a disadvantage also for a few people who were not so proficient in English, wanted to go for higher education, but could not really get themselves enrolled into it. And vernacular learning at primary level. So these were more or less a famous policy. Now, what was the impact of this Western education? So it's a mixed bag. So the Indians belonging to high and middle classes benefited from Western education. Their learning in English fetched them lower level jobs in the British administration. Then the Indians were imparted selective knowledge about their own history and culture that served British interests. So this was a disadvantage, that the British probably taught only that what they wanted to. Again, and that was something which only talked about or which only showed or portrayed British in the good light or in a positive light. So thus creating a class who were basically who appreciated Western culture and supported the British rule. The Macular's minute point that I told you. For Indians coming from diverse cultural backgrounds and speaking different languages, English became an easy means of communication. It helped in breaking down the regional barriers. So there was an advantage also of English being the common language. Of course, girl education was encouraged. The society, the mindset of the society was changing, leading towards growth. And initially, most of the educated Indians supported the British rule. However, gradually they became influenced by the Western ideas, the ideas mainly of the French Revolution of liberty, equality, and fraternity, democracy. And many wanted India to get freedom from the British and emerge as modern democratic nation. The spirit of nationalism later saw a large number of Western educated Indians, about whom we will study, actively taking part in India's struggle for independence. But there was a major drawback, was that it failed to reach out to the poor people and those living in villages. So basically only those who had the required resources, particularly the financial resources, only they could make the most of this education or the new or the refined education system. So this is about, in today's class, we studied about, or we studied the story about the policies that the British introduced so as to strengthen their control. Now, so many policies were coming into existence. So many changes were coming into existence. How did the Indians react to it? We are going to study about this in the next class. All right. Till then, bye-bye, my dear students. Take care.